that Transfiguration has moved some of the catechesis off of Wednesday nights for our confirmation sponsors, and after every Mass we have volunteers that will meet with them to discuss for a short time what they are learning. So I want to express our gratitude from the parish for the volunteers that Sunday after Sunday will meet with our young people and answer their questions and probe the faith. And so, given the fact that there's not as much catechesis happening on Wednesday nights, I wanted to direct this particular homily to our confirmation candidates. So I'm hoping the rest of you can gain something from it, but it's primarily intended for them. We want them to have to get some the basic things right about our Christian faith. In the gospel today, we hear John the Baptist say, as Jesus approaches him, and I'm sure there's a crowd, his disciples are behind him, he almost yells, I think, "Behold, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world." And I imagine John the Baptist saying this not just, in a quiet voice, but I imagine him saying it with some gusto, with some meaning, with some desperateness almost. Because John the Baptist was acutely aware of sin, and he was sent to assist in getting rid of sin, or to help people understand that they were sinful. And so John the Baptist realized that the world was messed up and that people were messed up. And so what I want to communicate to our confirmation candidates is some basic Catholic teaching about 3 ways in which we as humans are messed up. And not when I use the word messed up, I don't mean totally unfixable, totally messed up. Some fellow Christians of ours believe, on the other hand, that we as people are totally messed up, that we cannot do one single good thing. But we as Catholics believe that we are messed up a little bit in 3 ways. We are messed up a little bit in our minds, in our intellects, in our hearts and what we desire. And thirdly, we are messed up a little bit in our strength, or the ability to do what we want to do. So the first way, our minds and our intellect is disordered. Our minds are cloudy, foggy, darkened, and disabled by sin. And our brains sometimes don't comprehend reality correctly, both the things we see, but also in the things that we don't see. And we are not always great at detecting counterfeits. I have a brother-in-law who is a Secret Service agent, and I learned as he told stories about driving for the president and protecting the president, that they also are charged with counterfeits, and in their spare time they will investigate counterfeits. So they get really good at detecting counterfeits. Our brains are not that good all the time at this. Like Jesus was very good at this when he was tempted in the desert, right? Where the devil came up to him with very tempting things, and he was able to detect the lies of the enemy. Because lies always contain some aspect of the truth, and they're distorted, and that's why they're so enticing and difficult to detect when there is a counterfeit. And so our brains don't always work correctly. I think of a little example at our house. Whenever I lose something, my brain immediately goes to blaming someone else for that loss, whether it's my keys or something else. Oh, so-and-so again. But that's usually not the case. So I concluded that and blamed them way too quickly in my mind. And another example for me is a movie that I saw years ago where a very beautiful woman, they show her coming into a bathroom and looking into a mirror. And what you see in the mirror is this distorted, gross reflection a grotesque almost reflection, and the woman believes that she's ugly, even though she's beautiful. And how easily we can believe, because of our weakness in our minds, things like that. Or a couple weeks ago, my daughter came back from college, and I had coffee with her in the morning, and I asked her, well, how can I pray for you? And she said, Dad, at night I get anxious. I can't sleep. Anxiety is a big thing for me. So we talked about anxiety a little bit. And we quickly determined that anxiety and anxious thoughts are counterfeits, right? They aren't the reality, because the next day things won't be quite so bad as we thought them the prior evening. And even theological things like relativism that our young people are exposed to, forces telling them lies of, the Catholic faith really isn't much different than any other religion. They're all great. They all have their pluses and their minuses. It's just one among many. The error of relativism. The second way that that we're messed up a little bit is in our hearts. In our hearts. Our hearts desire disordered things. They're often disordered. And we can get messed up a little bit in the things we desire. Sometimes we look for love in all the wrong places, as the song goes. And we don't always desire things in our heart that lead to our maximum fulfillment or our maximum happiness. And the Ten Commandments will kind of mention some of these, biggies especially. Do not covet thy neighbor's wife. Do not covet thy neighbor's goods. Our hearts can be desirous too much of our neighbor's Ferrari or house or football team or whatever. And the Ten Commandments speak also of stealing. Sometimes we are tempted to steal. Sometimes we are tempted to lie. We desire to get something, perhaps by lying. And so our hearts and our desires can become disordered and not pointed in the right direction and leading to where we want to go. And a great visual for me for this is the Lord of the Rings story. The character of Gollum. Gollum is that character who had a disordered desire for the ring. And this disordered desire for the ring turned him into something that he shouldn't have been. And the ring was something that was not for him to possess. And it brought consequences to him as he desired it. He kept referring it to what? My precious, right? Another example is King David walking out onto his roof one day and noticing a beautiful woman named Bathsheba bathing on the roof next door. And what does David do? He desires her. But she was Uriah's wife. And so his desire for her was a little bit disordered, wasn't it? And this desire to covet somebody else's wife is not too different, perhaps, than someone with same-sex attraction. It's life-giving to have same-sex friends, right? It's life-giving to even live in same-sex households. I lived in numerous same-sex households before I got married. But it's disordered to desire same-sex intimacy. And this desire will not lead us to the happiness and fulfillment that we want, which can only be found in God. So our minds are messed up a little bit, our hearts are sometimes disordered, and not only in big ways, even in very small ways, even perhaps being a little bit like myself, too attached to the Minnesota Wild. Or you can be attached to gummy worms or food, all sorts of different foods. Have you ever encountered someone who's just a little bit too attached to something that they probably shouldn't be quite so attached to? It happens to all of us. We all are disordered a little bit in our hearts and what we desire. And the third way is in our strength or our muscles or our ability to do what we want to do, we're supposed to do. And The Apostle Paul gives a great description of this. He says, "Woe is me. I can't do what I'm supposed to do. I want to be holy. I want to do God's will. I want to be a nice person. I want to do these things, but I can't. I make all sorts of New Year's resolutions, but I can't ever keep them. I keep going to confession for the same old things. Woe is me," he says. "Woe is me. Who can save me from this?" he says in his letter. And so the confirmation candidates, how these three weaknesses might play themselves out in your life perhaps in the future is one day most of you will get married. And I hate to break it to you, but every married person here at Transfiguration will tell you that you will certainly marry someone who will not always think correctly, who will not always desire correctly, and who will not always be able to do the right thing. Won't be able to love you perfectly and love others perfectly. Join the human race. We all want a perfect spouse, but we don't always receive that. That's one of the things we learn, is that every single human being has weaknesses in their mind, in their desires, and in their strength to carry out what they're supposed to do. So who can improve on this situation? Who can fix us? Who can fix others? Who can point us in the right direction and help us to get there? You know the answer. The answer comes from the lips of John the Baptist in today's gospel. He says, and he says it with a little gusto. He says, there is the Lamb of God. There is him who can take away the sins of the world. There he is. He can do it. He is the only one, you know, who can repair our disorders. And the priest will hold up the Eucharist and will say these words to us before our eyes at every Mass. So that's those two things I'd like to communicate. Just the basic to our confirmation candidates that, you know, when you look at people and you see the nice facade, there's always, every single person has weaknesses in what they think, in what they desire, and in their strength to be able to carry out. But then secondly, that Christ is the answer to all these, and he can actually repair us and allow us to desire and think and to do what we are supposed to do.